Whenever we hear Columbian exchange, what comes to mind? Usually it's stuff like horses, wheat, and diseases coming to the Americas, right? But that's really only half the story. So today we're going to flip that script. We're going to look at the other side of the coin. The incredible, world-changing innovations in food, science, and even medicine that the indigenous peoples of the Americas gave to the rest of the world. So let's just ask it straight up. What did the Americas actually give the world? And I'll tell you, the answers aren't just buried in some dusty old history book. No, they're sitting right on your dinner plate tonight. They're in your medicine cabinet. And yeah, even in the way you might kick back and relax on a lazy summer afternoon. I mean, just take a look at this. Can you even imagine Italian food without tomatoes? Or think about Irish history. What would it be without the potato? And maybe the most important question of all, a world without chocolate? It's unthinkable. Every single one of these things, plus, get this, the very idea of relaxing in a hammock, all of it came from the Americas. We're talking about a legacy that completely reshaped cultures all over the globe. All right, so here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll dive into some revolutionary ideas that literally changed how the world thinks. Then we'll check out the global menu that now feeds billions of us. We'll see how everyday crafts got woven into daily life. And then we'll have to turn to the darker side of things, the labor that built empires. We'll wrap it all up with a look at ancient cures that are, believe it or not, the foundation of a lot of our modern medicine. Okay, so first up, ideas. And we're talking about ideas that were way ahead of their time. Long before any Europeans arrived, civilizations in the Americas were pioneering incredible concepts in math, astronomy, and how societies could be organized. So this wasn't just about trading stuff. It was a genuine exchange of knowledge, and one that would totally alter how the world thought. And the intellectual contributions, they're absolutely staggering when you think about it. Take the Maya, for example. They came up with the mathematical concept of zero, all on their own. That's a huge breakthrough. You can't do complex math without it. They also created super detailed almanacs for farming and even had organized sports like ball games that were a huge part of their culture. And these weren't just fun and games. They were really sophisticated systems, both socially and scientifically. And this right here, this shows a level of scientific genius that is just, well, it's mind-boggling. The Maya calendar wasn't just one simple calendar. Nope. It was a bunch of different, complex calendars that all worked together, interlocking to track the stars and planets with unbelievable accuracy. This was world-class stuff, world-class astronomy and math, and it was all developed completely separate from anything happening in Europe or Asia. All right, so from the world of ideas, let's shift gears to something we can all relate to, something that literally sustains us, food. Because this next part is all about how indigenous agriculture created a whole new global menu, one that completely changed what the entire planet eats every single day. I mean, would you just look at this bounty? Corn, potatoes, cassava. Today, those are 3 of the top 10 staple foods eaten across the entire planet. And that's before we even start talking about things like vanilla or pineapples or, oh yeah, the gift from the gods themselves, cocoa, the stuff that makes chocolate. These weren't just some new flavor options. They became the actual bedrock of entire national cuisines. And this single quote, wow, it really captures the sheer scale of the impact, doesn't it? The humble potato. First grown by the Incas way up in the Andes Mountains. It gets taken to Europe and becomes so important, so vital, that it actually fuels population booms and saves entire countries from famine. The journey of just that one vegetable, it literally changed the course of European history. Wild. Okay, so beyond what we eat, indigenous ingenuity was also woven right into the fabric of everyday life. In this next part, we're going to look at some of the super practical crafts and technologies that started in the Americas but are still essential to us all over the world today. Just think about it for a second. Things we might take for granted, like the canoe or snowshoes for getting around, or architectural styles like adobe that are still beautiful and practical. And of course, from the simple, pure genius of the hammock to the stunning beauty of beadwork and turquoise jewelry, these weren't just things. They were brilliant solutions to real-world problems and incredible art forms that were picked up and admired all over the world. But we need to pause right here, because if we're going to tell this story honestly, we have to be real about it. This exchange wasn't always some simple, happy trade. Not at all. It was way more complicated, and in many cases, it was incredibly brutal. And that brings us to what is probably the hardest part of this whole story, the engine of empire. Because this exchange also included the contribution of human labor. And it wasn't voluntary. It was forced on a massive scale that built the fortunes of entire nations. You know, it's a truly tragic story of how this relationship evolved. At first, there was cooperation. Indigenous people actually taught the newcomers how to survive in this new place. But what might have started with some voluntary labor, it shifted, and it shifted fast. By the 1500s, it had turned into a full-blown system of forced labor, of slavery, and these really brutal colonial systems like the encomienda, which basically gave colonists total control over indigenous people and their work. So let's be crystal clear about this. The labor of indigenous people, growing the crops, digging the gold and silver out of the mines, diving for pearls, this wasn't some minor side note in the history books. It was the absolute foundation, the bedrock upon which the incredible wealth of European empires was built. All right, for our final section, let's turn to medicine. Because this part of the exchange had a huge impact on global health. And it was a two-way street, but not a balanced one. It involved the spread of new diseases, but also, and this is so important, the transfer of ancient healing knowledge that, frankly, we still use today. So while Europeans did encounter some new diseases like Chagas, the flow of medical knowledge, well, that was life-saving, and it mostly went in one direction. As these newcomers were struggling to survive in a place they didn't understand, it was the deep indigenous knowledge of local plants and how to use them as medicine that was absolutely vital for their survival. And this might be the most powerful example of that legacy. For centuries, indigenous peoples knew that chewing on the bark of the willow tree could help with fever and pain. Why did it work? Because that bark contains something called salicylic acid, which is the active ingredient in modern aspirin. Yep, that little white pill in your bathroom cabinet has a direct line right back to ancient indigenous medicine. So let's wrap this all up. When you look at the whole picture, from science and sports to architecture and art, from the potatoes and corn that literally feed billions of people to the forced labor that bankrolled empires, and the medical knowledge that's the basis for modern treatments, the contributions from the Americas were just monumental. There's no other word for it. So we'll leave you with this question to think about. Now that you know all this, knowing that so much of our modern world, what we eat, the medicine we take, our economies, even our culture, was built on this foundation, how does that change the story? How does that change the way you look at the history of the last 500 years?